We interrupt this program to bring you an important Wayfair message. Wayfair's got style tips for every home. This is Styles McKenzie helping you make those rooms sing. Today's style tip. When it comes to making a statement, treat bold patterns like neutrals. Go wild, like an untamed animal print area rug under a rustic farmhouse table from Wayfair.com. Arr, fierce. This has been your Wayfair style tip to keep those interiors superior.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
You're listening to Reverie True Crime, your gateway to the darkest corners of human nature, where we expose the hidden truths of human depravity. These harrowing stories serve as a sobering reminder to keep our senses keen and our awareness sharp, for predators lurk in unexpected places, patiently waiting and observing. Join us as we unravel mysteries, explore motives, and seek justice for victims as we bring awareness to these cases. Listener discretion is advised.
Hello and welcome to Reverie True Crime. I'm your host, Paige. Today we're going to talk about a story that's way different than the version we've all heard before. You probably think you know all about the Manson murders. A crazed cult, brainwashed hippies, and a madman obsessed with the Beatles. But what if I told you there's a lot more to it, and it leads straight to government agencies, mind control experiments, and evidence that mysteriously vanished? In this episode, we're going to explore the book Chaos, Charles Manson, the CIA, and the Secret History of the Sixties by journalist Tom O'Neill. This is not your average true crime Manson story. Tom O'Neill spent 20 years digging up evidence that the CIA, law enforcement, and intelligence operatives may have played a much bigger role in Manson's story than anyone ever admitted. By the end of this episode, you might question everything you thought you knew. So let's get into it. We all know Charles Manson as this crazy-eyed cult leader responsible for one of the most infamous murder sprees in American history. But what if I told you he probably should have been in prison when the Tate LaBianca murders happened? By every legal standard, this man should have been locked up. So why wasn't he? Manson wasn't some misunderstood hippie who just snapped. By the time he got to San Francisco in 1967, the so-called Summer of Love, he was already a career criminal. Decades of prison time, theft, fraud, pimping, you name it. He even did time for stealing cars and violating the Mann Act, which involved trafficking women across state lines. When he was released from prison in March of 1967, even he didn't want out. He told prison officials that he would rather stay behind bars, not because he was reformed, but because, in his words, quote, prison was home. So why would they let a repeat offender, someone with zero interest in rehabilitation, just walk free? And it gets worse. Once he was out, Manson broke the conditions of his parole again and again without facing any consequences. We're not talking about small stuff. There were drug charges, assaults, and even accusations of sex trafficking underage girls. Yet somehow, Manson just kept skating by. So the big question is how? This is where Roger Smith, Manson's parole officer, comes in. Parole officers are supposed to make sure ex-cons follow the rules. If you break those rules, you're headed back to prison. No questions asked. But Roger Smith, he wasn't your average parole officer. For one, he was deeply connected to behavioral research at the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic, which was the very same place Manson and his family hung around. So, while he was supposed to be monitoring Manson, Roger Smith was also working with researchers who were studying drug abuse and social behavior. During the time that Manson was under Roger's supervision, he got arrested at least 8 times. And not for just jaywalking. These were serious crimes. Yet every single time, his parole was never revoked. It's almost like someone wanted him on the streets. Tom O'Neill, the author of Chaos, discovered that there was a secret program operating in San Francisco at the time, something called the San Francisco Project. It was a research initiative that combined law enforcement with psychiatric studies. Basically, it was a program to monitor and manipulate social deviants. And guess who seemed to fall right into that category? Yeah, Charles Manson. Now, there's no smoking gun document saying, hey, Charles Manson was part of a mind control experiment. But when you start connecting the dots, it does get creepy. Manson was always in trouble, but he never faced real consequences. He wasn't just slipping through the cracks. Someone, somewhere, seemed to be protecting him. And the fact that his parole officer was linked to a research clinic that was known for studying human behavior, it just doesn't seem like a coincidence. Tom O'Neill even found documents suggesting that the CIA was running MKUltra style experiments right in Haight-Ashbury during the exact time Manson was there. If you don't know about MKUltra, let's put a pin in that because we're going to go down that rabbit hole soon. Here's where things go from a little weird to outright shady. When Tom O'Neill started digging through official records for his investigation, he found that Manson's parole files were missing. Not just a few pages, not just a redacted section, the entire file was gone. Tom O'Neill went to the U.S. Justice Department and they told him that they couldn't find the documents. And he's not the first person to run into this problem. Other journalists and researchers trying to investigate Manson's parole have hit the same wall. So let's do a quick recap of what we know so far. Manson was a repeat offender, somehow got out of prison despite not wanting to leave. He repeatedly violated his parole, but his parole officer, who's connected to social behavior research, never sends him back to prison. Official parole records that should explain all of this, completely missing. Something's not really adding up. So let's really think about it. Why would law enforcement and government agencies go so easy on a guy like Manson? This man was dangerous, violent, and out of control. But instead of locking him up, they let him loose, right in the middle of a counterculture movement that the government was desperate to suppress. If you know anything about the 1960s, you know the U.S. government was obsessed with controlling and undermining political free thinkers and nonconformists. The FBI had COINTELPRO, a secret program to disrupt and discredit activists like the Black Panthers and anti-war groups. Meanwhile, the CIA was knee-deep in mind control experiments through MKUltra. Was Manson's freedom possibly part of a bigger plan? Here is a theory. What if Manson, and the violence he inspired was used to paint the hippie movement as dangerous and depraved. After all, nothing kills a social revolution faster than a brutal, high-profile murder spree. And by letting Manson roam free, someone made sure that the chaos he created would destroy the peace and love image of the 1960s for good. Coincidence? You tell me. When Manson got out of prison in 1967, he didn't just wander aimlessly into the California hippie scene. No, he walked right into ground zero for some of the strangest, most suspicious experiments in American history. And it all leads back to a seemingly harmless place, the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic. It sounds innocent enough, a free clinic helping out the flower children of San Francisco. Well, not exactly. Behind the peace and love facade, there's evidence that something else was going on. Something involving drugs, mind control, and secret government projects. The Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic opened its doors in 1967, right in the heart of San Francisco's counterculture movement. It was a place where young people, many of them homeless, addicted, or mentally unstable, could get free health care. On the surface, it seemed like a perfect fit for the times. The summer of love was in full swing. Thousands of hippies flooding into San Francisco, tripping on LSD, rejecting authority, and living free. A clinic like this was a lifeline for people who could not afford medical care. But there's always a twist, right? The clinic wasn't just about helping people. Tom O'Neill discovered that the clinic had some very unusual connections, specifically to government-funded research projects studying drug use and human behavior. And it wasn't just any research. We're talking about studies that echo MKUltra, the CIA's infamous mind control program that experimented on unsuspecting Americans. And the clinic was right in the middle of it. So let's talk about a guy named Dr. David Smith. No relation to Manson's parole officer Roger Smith, but equally important. He's the one who founded the clinic, but it gets interesting. Dr. David Smith was heavily involved in drug research, especially around LSD and amphetamines. In fact, his work was funded by federal agencies that had a long track record of partnering with the CIA. In the 1960s, the U.S. government was obsessed with understanding and controlling human behavior. And drugs like LSD, they were seen as a way to unlock the brain and reprogram people's thoughts. At the clinic, Dr. Smith and his colleagues were studying the effects of these drugs on patients, many of whom had no idea they were part of an experiment. According to O'Neill's research, the clinic was part of something called the Amphetamine Research Project, which was tracking how people responded to heavy drug use. During the exact time that the Haight-Ashbury Clinic was conducting these studies on human behavior, Manson and his growing family were regulars there. Manson was not just dropping by for a quick checkup. He was actively recruiting followers from the clinic's patient pool. Vulnerable young people, many of them mentally fragile from drug use, were like easy pickings for someone with manipulative charisma. Despite all of his parole violations, despite the fact that he was basically building a cult, no one stopped him. According to O'Neill, there are 0 records of Charles Manson ever receiving official medical care at that clinic. So, why was he there so often? It's like he wasn't just hanging around, he was allowed to be there. Was the clinic just a front for something else? When you look at Manson's manipulation tactics, they start to line up a little too perfectly with the kind of mind control techniques being studied by the government. For example, breaking down individual identity. Charles Manson separated his followers from their families. He renamed them and stripped them of their old identities. Drug-induced suggestibility. He used LSD and amphetamines to lower his followers' inhibitions and make them more suggestible. Sleep deprivation. He would keep his followers awake for days at a time. Another classic method of controlling the mind. Reward and punishment. He alternated between love bombing and cruelty, which created psychological dependency. All of these methods match MKUltra techniques, methods that the CIA had been perfecting for decades. Did Manson learn these tactics on his own, or was he taught? Tom O'Neill's research points to a disturbing possibility that Manson may have been more than just a parolee. As I said, he was being monitored by a parole officer who was connected to behavioral studies. Manson spent tons of time at a clinic involved in drug and psychological research. Manson somehow avoided arrest time and time again, even when he should have been sent back to prison. It's almost like someone was watching and waiting to see what would happen next. The CIA had a track record of this kind of thing. Under MKUltra, they secretly dosed unsuspecting people with LSD to study how they reacted. They wanted to see if drugs could reprogram the mind or even turn ordinary people into uncontrollable killers. Tom O'Neill even found evidence that Manson might have been protected to keep these experiments running. And if that's true, it changes everything we thought we knew about the Manson murders. If Manson wasn't just a random cult leader, if he was part of a larger experiment, then the entire official story falls apart. That raises some pretty big questions. Did the government know what Manson was doing and let it happen anyway? Were the Tate LaBianca murders a side effect of a failed behavioral experiment? And how much of this is still being hidden? Because as Tom O'Neill's research proves, someone went to great lengths to keep this buried. Okay, so far we've talked about Manson's suspicious parole and how he spent way too much time around a research clinic connected to government-funded experiments. But what if all of that was part of something bigger? Something darker? Because there's serious evidence that Charles Manson was tangled up in MKUltra. And when you start connecting those dots, again, it's almost impossible not to ask, was Charles Manson a pawn in a government experiment gone horribly wrong? So we have to understand MKUltra to see how it might connect to Manson. In the early 1950s, during the height of the Cold War, the CIA became obsessed with controlling human behavior. They weren't just worried about bombs and spies, they were terrified that enemy countries had developed ways to brainwash people. And if the Soviets or the Chinese could do it, the CIA wanted to do it better. So they launched MKUltra, a secret program aimed at figuring out how to control, reprogram, and even erase human minds. I know it sounds like science fiction, but it was very real, and it went on for 20 years that we know of. Through MKUltra, the CIA ran hundreds of experiments, many of them illegal, on unsuspecting civilians. Here are some of the things they tested: LSD and other hallucinogens to see if they could weaken the mind, sleep deprivation to break people mentally, sensory isolation to push subjects into psychosis, hypnosis to plant false memories or erase real ones. When the program was first exposed in the 1970s, the CIA destroyed most of the evidence. What we know today comes from fragments of those surviving documents. And a huge chunk of those experiments were conducted in California, the same time and the same place where Manson was building his family. Now let's talk about a guy named Dr. Louis Jolyon West. And if you've never heard of him, well, Dr. Jolly West was one of the top psychiatrists involved in MKUltra experiments. And his entire career was built around studying how to break and control the human mind. This man was not just playing around with theories. He was performing real-life experiments on people. Once, he even killed an elephant with a massive dose of LSD just to see what would happen. That's the kind of person we're talking about. Dr. Jolly West spent a whole lot of time in the late 1960s at the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic. Dr. Jolly West had a research project there called the Violence Center, which focused on understanding and controlling violent behavior. And wouldn't you know it, this project had deep ties to the same government agencies funding MKUltra. Tom O'Neill did find evidence that Dr. Jolly West may have had direct contact with Manson and or the people around him. In fact, Dr. Jolly's research in San Francisco revolved around predicting and influencing violent outbursts right when Manson's family was becoming more violent. Manson became famous for controlling his followers' minds and convincing them to commit horrific murders. I've been talking about connecting the dots, so let's connect some right now. Manson's parole freedom. Despite being a repeat offender, he was allowed to roam free. The Free Medical Clinic, a place tied to government drug studies where Manson often hung out. MKUltra's focus, mind control through drugs, hypnosis, and psychological breakdown, all techniques Manson used on his followers. The presence of Dr. Jolly West, a known MKUltra psychiatrist who was working right there at the same time. Does that sound like it's all coincidence? Or was Manson being watched, studied, or maybe even manipulated as part of a secret government program? As we touched on, in the early stages of his cult, Manson used those techniques that mirrored MKUltra experiments, like LSD dosing. Manson controlled when and how much LSD his followers took, just like MKUltra's experiments. Sleep deprivation. He kept his followers awake for days, which is a classic mind-breaking technique. Repetition and brainwashing. Manson would repeat his teachings endlessly until his followers believed they were true. So, why would the government even care about some ex-con cult leader? Well, during the 1960s, hippies and anti-establishment movements were seen as a national security threat. The government's goal? Control the chaos. What better way to discredit the entire hippie movement than by associating it with insane, drug-crazed murderers? Manson and his family fit that bill perfectly. If the public believed hippies weren't just harmless flower children, but dangerous lunatics, that would destroy the counterculture from the inside out. And guess what? It worked. After the Manson murders, the peace and love image of the 1960s was gone, replaced by fear and paranoia. O'Neill's investigation raises a disturbing possibility that Manson's violence was allowed to happen, or even influenced, because it served a political agenda. Manson's freedom was unexplainable by legal standards. The missing parole files were evidence that disappeared when researchers got too close. The media's narrative, it was carefully shaped to paint the hippie movement as dangerous. If even some of this is true, the Manson murders were not just a freak crime. It would mean they were part of a much bigger picture, one that is still being covered up today. Now let's talk about a man named Reeve Whitson, a figure who raises the biggest questions of all. If Tom O'Neill's findings are correct, Reeve Whitson might be the missing link, connecting the Manson murders to government intelligence agencies. Here's the craziest part. Reeve Whitson knew about the murders before anyone else. So, who exactly is or was Reeve Whitson? Well, here's the thing. Nobody actually knows. When Tom O'Neill started digging into the Manson case, Reeve Whitson's name was not part of the official narrative. You won't find him in Helter Skelter, Vincent Bugliosi's famous book about the trial. In fact, for decades, Reeve Whitson was basically invisible. But behind the scenes, he was everywhere. Reeve Whitson wasn't just some random person. He had deep ties to the U.S. intelligence agencies. Several sources told Tom O'Neill that Reeve Whitson worked as a covert operative, specializing in psychological operations, or PSYOPs for short. PSYOPs are tactics used by intelligence agencies to manipulate public opinion and control narratives. That fits perfectly with what happened after the Manson murders. According to Tom O'Neill's research, Reeve Whitson somehow had inside information about the Tate murders, even before the police discovered the crime scene. One of Tom O'Neill's most jaw-dropping interviews was with Bill Boyd, a private investigator who worked with Sharon Tate's family. Bill Boyd claimed that hours before the bodies were found, Reeve Whitson told him that, quote, something bad had happened at the Tate residence. Before the media, before the cops, this Reeve Whitson character already knew. How did he know? And why didn't he do anything to stop it? Multiple sources confirmed that Reeve Whitson had intelligence training, and it wasn't just a casual side gig. People described him as a person who could disappear for months at a time, only to resurface with vague, unsettling stories about his work. Tom O'Neill found evidence suggesting that Whitson's activities aligned with the CIA's broader mission in the 1960s, which was to neutralize the counterculture movement. Was Reeve Whitson monitoring Manson and his family for the government? And if he was, why didn't anyone stop them before the murders happened? Tom O'Neill also found multiple witnesses who said that Reeve Whitson wasn't just an outside observer. He was actively involved behind the scenes during the Manson trial. One witness, an attorney named Paul Fitzgerald, claimed that Reeve Whitson was pressuring people to stick to the official narrative of Helter Skelter. If you remember, Helter Skelter was the prosecution's theory that Manson wanted to start a race war. But a lot of people, including some close to the case, always thought that story was too simple. And guess who made sure that no other theories were explored in court? Reeve Whitson. He allegedly warned people not to ask too many questions, especially about Manson's connection to law enforcement and intelligence agencies. Tom O'Neill kept running into the same wall. No one could explain why Whitson had such a huge role in the Manson investigation. He wasn't a cop. He wasn't a lawyer. He didn't even officially work for the government. And yet, there he was, controlling the narrative, working behind the scenes, and intimidating anyone who got too close to other explanations. When Tom O'Neill tried to track down official records about Reeve Whitson's role in the Manson investigation, they were gone. Key documents from the LAPD, the sheriff's office, and even the Justice Department had been, quote, misplaced or outright destroyed. It seems kind of convenient. The more Tom pushed, the more people clammed up. Even those who confirmed Reeve Whitson's intelligence background refused to go on record. It's almost like someone wanted to make sure that his involvement stayed buried. What was Reeve Whitson really doing? Well, Tom's research suggests two possibilities. One, Reeve Whitson was monitoring Manson as part of a government experiment, possibly linked to MKUltra and behavioral control programs. 2. Reeve Whitson helped craft the official story, ensuring that the Manson murders were framed in a way that discredited the entire counterculture movement. Either way, it means that someone in power wanted to take hold of how the public understood these crimes, controlling the narrative, and they succeeded. So why does any of this matter now? Because if the Manson murders weren't just random chaos, if they were part of a covert government operation, it changes everything we think we know about the 1960s. It would mean that the official story was a cover-up. It would mean intelligence agencies were directly involved in shaping public stories. It would mean we still don't know the full truth because so much of the evidence is gone. And if they covered up this, what else don't we know? By now, you've seen how the Manson murders are way more complicated than the simple, crazed hippie cult narrative that we've been fed. But here's the thing. We only know that version of the story because someone wanted us to. The media was not just reporting the facts. They were basically creating and shaping the story to fit a specific narrative. And if you follow the trail, it looks a whole lot like a coordinated cover-up. So, how did the media turn a messy, confusing case into a clean-cut story about a race war, brainwashed hippies, and a cult leader from hell? And more importantly, why? From day one, the media was obsessed with the Manson case. And honestly, can you blame them? A sadistic cult leader, celebrity victims, Hollywood mansions and apocalyptic visions. It was made for headlines. Almost immediately, the media latched on to the same explanation: helter-skelter. We've all heard that Manson believed a race war was coming, inspired by the Beatles' song Helter Skelter. We've heard that he thought the murders would ignite this war and leave him and his family in power when the dust settled. It's a wild theory that most of us have believed for decades, and it might not even be true. Tom O'Neill's investigation uncovered a ton of evidence suggesting that Helter Skelter was just a smokescreen, a story created by prosecutor Vincent Bugliosi to wrap the case in a neat little bow. And who helped sell that story to the public? The media. Here's what most people don't know. Helter Skelter actually wasn't the original theory. When the Tate LaBianca murders first happened, the police had no clue what connected the crimes. For months, investigators were chasing everything from drug deals gone wrong to organized crime hits. But then Bugliosi came in, and suddenly the story changed. According to Tom O'Neill, Bugliosi needed the helter-skelter narrative to simplify the case and secure convictions. A big, messy conspiracy would be way too hard to prove, but a simple, quote, race war motive, that was easier for a jury to follow. The media ate it up because it was so sensational. Think about it. Most people do not want to read a confusing legal mess about parole violations and intelligence agencies, but a cult leader who was charismatic and brainwashing hippies to kill in the name of the Beatles, that sells. While newspapers were plastered with headlines about Manson's prophecies, what they were not talking about were all the things we're talking about. Tom O'Neill's discoveries. When O'Neill started asking questions years later, he found that even the prosecutor, Vincent Bugliosi's own notes contained evidence that contradicted his public claims. But by then, the story was already set in stone. Why would law enforcement and intelligence agencies care so much about shaping the story? Well, the 1960s was a time of mass rebellion. The government was freaking out about the growing counterculture. There were anti-war protests, civil rights movements, radical leftist groups, and the Manson murders, they were a perfect weapon to discredit that entire movement. If you paint hippies as drug-crazed killers, it becomes a lot easier to justify cracking down on them. And that's exactly what happened. After the Manson trial, public opinion turned hard against the hippie movement. Politicians used the fear that was generated by the murders to push for harsher laws and increased surveillance of political activists. Of course, it wouldn't be the first time the government had manipulated the press. We know for a fact that during the 1960s and 70s, the CIA was running something called Operation Mockingbird. This was a program where the agency planted stories in major newspapers, and they controlled the public narratives. Journalists from outlets like the New York Times, the Washington Post, and Time magazine were either paid by the CIA or acted as informants. So if the government wanted to shape the Manson story, they definitely had the tools to do it. Among the evidence Tom O'Neill found were sealed LAPD records that have never been released to the public, missing transcripts from key witnesses that vanished during the trial, government documents related to Manson's parole that no one can find, and when O'Neill tried to push further, he was shut down time and time again. If the government was willing to manipulate the Manson story, what else have they done? What else are they doing today? And if they could use media manipulation to control the narrative in the 1960s, what's stopping them from doing it right now? A lot of people have speculated the government has always controlled the media, but it raises such huge questions. How much of what we think we know about history has been engineered? What other events have been twisted to fit a government-friendly story? And if the real truth about the Manson murders is still hidden, what else are they hiding? Something to think about is who benefited from the Manson murders. The U.S. government. Big time. By 1969, the counterculture was out of control. You had anti-war protests that were shutting down cities, Black Panthers and other groups openly challenging authority, young people rejecting mainstream American values in huge numbers. The government saw these movements as a threat, and then boom, the Manson murders happened. Overnight, the media linked hippies with violence, drugs, and chaos. The peace and love image of the 1960s was dead. After Manson, public opinion started to shift. Suddenly, the hippie counterculture was not about freedom. It was about danger. Politicians used this fear to expand police powers, target activist groups, and shut down dissent. And the best part? The public did not even question it, because the Manson case made them scared. So I'll ask you these questions as we wrap up. Was Manson a test subject in a psychological experiment? Did the CIA use the murders to discredit political movements? Are there other crimes that were part of similar programs and we just don't know it yet? Tom O'Neill spent 20 years on this investigation, and even he admits he probably only scratched the surface. The deeper you go, the clearer it gets. Something else was going on, and the people in power wanted to make sure we never found out the truth. What if the truth about Charles Manson has been hidden for over 50 years? The story we've been told about Charles Manson and the Tate LaBianca murders doesn't add up. There are too many unanswered questions to chalk this up to a simple case of a crazy cult gone rogue. What if Manson's violence wasn't just random chaos? What if it was engineered, or at the very least, allowed to happen, because it served a political agenda? The U.S. government wanted to destroy the anti-establishment movement, and the Manson family gave them the perfect excuse. Do you think Manson was just a crazy cult leader, or part of a bigger plan? Did the CIA and other agencies use him to experiment on the public? And how much of the world we know today is the result of hidden manipulation? The truth might be out there somewhere, but only if you're willing to question everything. Check out Tom O'Neill's book, Chaos: Charles Manson, the CIA, and the Secret History of the 60s. I might have been a little repetitive in this episode, but it's a lot to piece together, a lot to remember, to go back and forth and connect these dots. But Tom O'Neill lays out everything in his book, from why he started digging into the case and how it went unfinished due to people completely shutting down. It really has made me rethink the whole narrative we've known for so long. For the last few years, I've tried to write and rewrite about this book, and I hope I did it a little justice, but definitely go check out the book for yourself. There will be a link to Tom's book in the show notes. Thanks so much for listening, and tune in next week for a new episode. Stay safe and take care.
Thank you for listening to this episode. As we close out, let us not forget awareness is our greatest defense. In a world that can be dark and grim, vigilance is our beacon of hope. When it comes to the cases we have explored together that have remained unsolved, if you happen to hold a piece of the puzzle, dare to step forward. As author Lois McMaster Bujold once said, "The dead cannot cry out for justice. It is a duty of the living to do so for them." Until we reconvene, my friends, stay vigilant and stay informed.